The train whistle pierced the autumn air as James Harper gathered his luggage. Kentucky's Redwood Valley stretched before him, a tapestry of crimson and gold leaves under the October sky of 1910. James had left behind the crowded streets of Boston to accept a teaching position at the Valley's small schoolhouse. 26 years old and eager to establish himself, he had responded to an advertisement in the Eastern Educator's Gazette. Teacher needed in prosperous Kentucky community. Room and board provided. The station was little more than a wooden platform with a small shelter. James adjusted his collar against the chill and looked around for his arranged transportation. An elderly man in weathered overalls approached. "Mr. Harper? I'm Elias Winters. Mrs. Blackwood sent me to fetch you." James shook the man's calloused hand. "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Winters. Just Elias is fine." He grabbed James's trunk. "Been teaching long?" "3 years in Boston," James replied, following Elias to a waiting wagon. "I'm looking forward to the quiet life here." Elias gave a grunt that James couldn't quite interpret. "Valley's quiet, all right." As they rode, James noticed how the houses grew increasingly sparse. They passed a small church, a general store, and clusters of modest homes before turning onto a narrow dirt road that wound upward through thickening forest. "Mrs. Blackwood's property is the largest in these parts," Elias explained. "Her husband struck it rich and coal before the accident. She rents the old servants' quarters to folks passing through. You'll be staying there while teaching at the school." "The accident?" James inquired. Elias's weathered face tightened. "Mining collapse. 10 years back now. Took Mr. Blackwood and 3 others. Mrs. Blackwood hasn't been the same since." They crested a hill, and James caught his first glimpse of Blackwood Estate, a sprawling Victorian mansion that loomed against the darkening sky. Its many gables and turrets cast long shadows across the manicured grounds. Behind it, partially obscured by pine trees, stood a smaller structure that James presumed would be his lodging. "How many students will I be teaching?" James asked, trying to hide his unease at the isolated location. 12, give or take," Elias replied. "Ages 7 to 16, smart young'uns mostly. The last teacher didn't stay long, why not?" Elias slowed the wagon as they approached the iron gates. Said the Valley didn't agree with him. "Here we are." As they pulled up to the mansion's entrance, the front door opened. A woman in a black dress stepped out, her posture rigid and unwelcoming. Her hair, streaked with gray, despite what James guessed was only 40 years of age, was pulled into a severe bun. "Mrs. Eleanor Blackwood," Elias announced quietly. "The widow of Redwood Valley." She regarded James with piercing eyes that seemed to evaluate his worth in seconds. "Mr. Harper, you're late. My apologies, Mrs. Blackwood. The train was delayed in Louisville." She nodded curtly. "Elias will show you to your quarters. Dinner is at 6 precisely. Don't be late for that as well." Without waiting for a response, she turned and disappeared back into the house. James followed Elias around the side of the mansion toward the smaller building. As they walked, he noticed a small cemetery on a knoll behind the house. "Family plot," Elias explained, following James's gaze. "Mr. Blackwood is there. And the others." "Others?" "Mrs. Blackwood's first husband. And her son." James felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. "I wasn't aware she'd been married before." Elias seemed to regret having mentioned it. "That's not for me to discuss. Here's where you'll be staying." The servants' quarters were modest but comfortable. Sitting room with a small fireplace, a bedroom, and a washroom. The furniture was well crafted but showed signs of age. "Previous tenants left in a hurry?" James asked, noticing a book left open on a side table. Elias didn't meet his eyes. "You could say that. The last teacher, Mr. Collins, departed rather suddenly. Said he was needed back east. Left most of his things behind." As Elias turned to leave, James called after him. "Elias, is there something I should know about this place?" The old man paused in the doorway, his silhouette framed against the fading daylight. "Just mind your business, Mr. Harper, and whatever you hear at night, don't go wandering. Some parts of the property aren't safe." With that cryptic warning, Elias left James alone in his new home, the door creaking shut behind him. James awakened to a gentle tapping at his window. Dawn had barely broken, casting long shadows across his room. He squinted through the glass, but saw nothing except the swaying branches of an elm tree. Sleep had been elusive. Throughout the night, strange sounds had drifted from the main house, footsteps pacing back and forth, and once what sounded like distant sobbing. Dinner the previous evening had been a stilted affair. Mrs. Blackwood had interrogated him about his teaching methods while barely touching her own food. The dining room's oppressive silence had been broken only by the ticking of a grandfather clock and the occasional directive from Mrs. Blackwood to her silent maid, Ida, an older woman who moved with the caution of someone perpetually afraid. Now, as James prepared for his first day at the schoolhouse, he explored his quarters more thoroughly. The previous tenant's belongings were indeed scattered throughout a half-written letter in the desk drawer, clothes still hanging in the wardrobe, and a pocket watch resting on the mantel. The letter caught James's attention. It was addressed to the Boston School Board and dated just 3 months earlier. I must regretfully tender my immediate resignation. Circumstances beyond my control necessitate my departure from Redwood Valley. I cannot in good conscience recommend any replacement be sent. The situation here is not as advertised. There is something deeply wrong with this place, and particularly with— The letter ended abruptly, as if the writer had been interrupted. James folded the unfinished letter and slipped it into his coat pocket. The discovery unsettled him, but he had 12 students expecting their new teacher. He couldn't allow vague warnings and abandoned possessions to distract him from his duties. The schoolhouse was a mile from the Blackwood estate, a single-room building with simple wooden desks and a pot-bellied stove. When James arrived, the children were already waiting outside, their curious faces studying him with undisguised interest. "Good morning," he greeted them with as much enthusiasm as he could muster. "I'm Mr. Harper, your new teacher." A girl of about 14 stepped forward. "I'm Margaret Winters, sir. Elias is my grandfather." She gestured to the other children. "We're glad you're here." Mr. Collins left without even saying goodbye. James unlocked the schoolhouse door. "I understand Mr. Collins had to leave suddenly." A younger boy piped up. "Mrs. Blackwood said he was ungrateful. Said he broke their agreement." "That's enough, Thomas." Margaret silenced him with a sharp look. The morning passed quickly as James assessed the students' knowledge. They were indeed bright, as Elias had mentioned, but they seemed hesitant to speak unless directly addressed. During the lunch break, James noticed how they huddled together, whispering and casting occasional glances his way. When classes ended, Margaret lingered behind. "Sir, where are you staying?" she asked, though James suspected she already knew. "Mrs. Blackwood has kindly provided accommodation in the servants' quarters." Margaret frowned. "Be careful there, Mr. Harper. The last 4 tenants didn't stay long. I was only told about Mr. Collins." She nodded solemnly. "Mr. Collins was just the last one. Before him was Miss Abernathy, then Mr. Finch, and before him Dr. Patterson. All within the last 2 years. Did they all leave suddenly?" "That's what Mrs. Blackwood tells everyone." Margaret glanced toward the door as if checking they weren't overheard. "But grandfather says none of them were ever seen leaving the valley. Their things just stayed in that cottage until Mrs. Blackwood had I'd packed them away. And then a new advertisement would appear in the papers." A chill ran down James's spine, but he maintained his composure. "I'm sure there's a simple explanation, Margaret. Just be careful, sir. If you start hearing the crying at night, or if she invites you to the cellar." She stopped abruptly as her grandfather appeared at the schoolhouse door. "Margaret, your grandmother's waiting," Elias called, his expression darkening when he saw her speaking with James. "Time to go." Margaret gathered her books. "Remember what I said, Mr. Harper," she whispered before hurrying out. That evening, James returned to his quarters to find a note pinned to his door. "Mr. Harper, your presence is requested in the main house library after dinner. We have matters to discuss regarding your tenure here." Blackwood dinner was again a quiet affair, with Mrs. Blackwood offering only curt responses to James's attempts at conversation. Afterwards, she led him to the library, a grand room with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves and a massive stone fireplace. "Please sit," she instructed, gesturing to a leather chair opposite her own. "I trust your first day was satisfactory?" "The children are eager to learn," James replied diplomatically. "Good. I have high expectations for their education." She poured 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. "Bourbon, my late husband's reserve." James accepted the glass but didn't drink. "Mrs. Blackwood, I found something curious today. A letter from my predecessor." Her expression didn't change, but he noticed her knuckles whiten around her glass. Mr. Collins was unsuitable for this community. He asked too many questions. About what? About matters that didn't concern him. She fixed him with a penetrating stare. "Let me be direct, Mr. Harper. I require a teacher for the children, not an investigator into local affairs. Your position here, including your room and board, depends on your discretion." "I understand," James said carefully, "but I can't help but wonder why so many teachers have come and gone in such a short time." Mrs. Blackwood set down her glass. "People come to Redwood Valley seeking something: peace, opportunity, escape. Some find what they're looking for. Others do not." She stood abruptly. "It's getting late. You should retire for the evening. The path can be treacherous after dark." As James walked back to his quarters, the moon cast long shadows across the grounds. He paused, sensing he was being watched. Turning toward the main house, he glimpsed a pale face at an upstairs window. Not Mrs. Blackwood, but someone younger. The figure retreated quickly when James's eyes met theirs. Inside his room, James locked the door behind him. He retrieved the letter from his pocket and read it again, wondering what Mr. Collins had discovered that frightened him so. As if in answer, A floorboard creaked overhead, in a part of the building that should have had no upper floor. The next morning, James woke to find a small wooden doll placed outside his door. Crudely carved, it wore a tiny noose around its neck. He pocketed the disturbing object, uncertain whether it was a prank by one of the schoolchildren or something more sinister. At school, James noticed the children were unusually subdued. When he asked what was wrong, they exchanged nervous glances before Margaret finally spoke up. "It's Mary Cooper's birthday today, Mr. Harper." "And where is Mary?" James asked, noticing an empty desk. "She's gone," a small boy named Samuel replied. "Like the others." Margaret shot Samuel a warning look. "Her family moved away last month. Mrs. Blackwood says we should forget about her, but it was her 10th birthday, and we wanted to remember." James felt a growing unease. Did many families leave the valley recently? "Only the ones who ask questions," Margaret said quietly. After school, instead of returning directly to the Blackwood estate, James decided to visit the local general store. The shopkeeper, a middle-aged man named Walter Perry, grew visibly nervous when James introduced himself as the new teacher staying at the Blackwood property. "Another one," Walter muttered, busying himself with reorganizing items on a shelf. "Didn't think she'd find a replacement so quick after Collins." "Did you know Mr. Collins well?" James asked casually. Walter glanced toward the door before answering. "Not well, no. Came in here occasionally. Asked a lot of questions like you're doing." "What kind of questions?" "About the Blackwood family history. About the accidents." Walter's voice dropped to a whisper. "About the missing folks." James leaned closer. "Missing folks? Listen, Mr. Harper. I've got a family to feed. I can't afford to cross Mrs. Blackwood. She owns half the valley, including the note on this store." Walter wiped his brow nervously. "But I'll tell you this much. People who dig too deep around here tend to disappear." Collins was asking about the Blackwood family cemetery, about why there are graves there with no names, unmarked graves, 5 of them added over the past 2 years. Small plots, Walter's meaning was clear, child-sized graves. "And the authorities haven't investigated?" Walter laughed bitterly. "Sheriff Tanner married Mrs. Blackwood's cousin. He's not about to investigate anything on that property." As James left the store, he noticed Ida, Mrs. Blackwood's maid, watching him from across the street. She quickly ducked into the milliner's shop when their eyes met. That night, James couldn't sleep. The wind whistled through the trees outside his window, carrying with it what sounded like distant voices. Around midnight, he was startled by a soft knocking at his door. Hand trembling, he opened it to find Ida standing there, her weathered face etched with fear. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered urgently. None of the others listened either. "Ida, what's happening here? What happened to the previous teachers?" She glanced nervously over her shoulder. "Mrs. Blackwood, she's not right. Not since losing her son. She believes." Ida stopped suddenly, her eyes widening at something behind James. He turned to see what had frightened her, but the cottage was empty. When he looked back, Ida was hurrying away across the moonlit grounds. "Ida, wait," he called after her, but she disappeared into the shadows. Returning to his desk, James lit a lamp and began a letter of his own to the Boston School Board, documenting his suspicions. As he wrote, he heard a child's laughter echo from somewhere in the house, a sound that chilled him to the bone, knowing he was supposed to be alone. Following the sound, James entered the bedroom and froze. The closet door, which he was certain had been closed, now stood slightly ajar. Heart pounding, he approached slowly and pulled it open. Inside was a small door set into the wall, a door he hadn't noticed before. It was unlocked. Beyond it, a narrow staircase led upward into darkness. James hesitated only briefly before grabbing his lamp and climbing the stairs. They led to a small attic space directly above his bedroom. The room was empty except for a child's rocking chair that moved gently back and forth, as if recently vacated. On the wall, childish drawings had been pinned up, pictures of a large house, a woman in black, and stick figures lying in what appeared to be boxes in the ground. One drawing showed a woman holding hands with several children, leading them toward a dark shape that resembled a cellar door. As James examined the disturbing artwork, he heard the unmistakable sound of the attic door closing behind him. He spun around to find Mrs. Blackwood standing there, a ring of keys in one hand and a serene smile on her face. "I see you've found William's playroom," she said calmly. "He's been so lonely since his passing, but he tells me he likes you. Mr. Harper, he thinks you'd make a wonderful playmate, forever." James backed away from Mrs. Blackwood, the lamp trembling in his hand. "Your son died, Mrs. Blackwood. These drawings, William has always been artistic," she interrupted, her voice unnervingly calm. Even after the fever took him, he continued to create. The others didn't understand at first, but they learned. They all learned. The rocking chair behind James began to move more vigorously, though no one sat in it. Mrs. Blackwood smiled at the empty seat as one might at a beloved child. "What happened to the other teachers?" James demanded, trying to keep his voice steady. "To Mr. Collins and Miss Abernathy? To Mary Cooper and her family?" Mrs. Blackwood's smile faded. "They broke their covenant. They tried to leave." She stepped further into the room, forcing James to retreat until his back pressed against the wall. "No one leaves Redwood Valley without my permission, Mr. Harper. William needs friends. The children need a teacher. This is the natural order of things." "You're insane," James whispered. Her eyes flashed dangerously. "Careful, Mr. Harper. I've been very patient with you. More patient than with Mr. Collins, who tried to alert the authorities in Louisville." She fingered the keys at her waist. "He didn't make it past the property line." James's mind raced, calculating the distance to the door. "And the unmarked graves in your family cemetery? Those who stay with William are family. They earned their place there." She gestured to the rocking chair. "William chooses who stays. He's chosen you." A sharp chill enveloped the room. The lamp in James's hand flickered wildly, casting grotesque shadows across Mrs. Blackwood's face. The rocking chair stilled abruptly. "He's decided," Mrs. Blackwood whispered. "Tomorrow night you'll join the others in the cellar. It's quite painless, I assure you. A special tea first, then eternal sleep. Your body will rest in our family plot, but your spirit will remain here with William. Forever." With surprising speed, she lunged forward. James dodged, nearly dropping the lamp as he darted toward the door. Mrs. Blackwood's fingers caught his sleeve, her nails digging into his arm like talons. "You can't leave?" she shrieked, her composure shattering. "William wants you to stay." James tore free, yanking the door open and stumbling down the narrow stairs. Behind him, Mrs. Blackwood's footsteps thundered in pursuit. He burst into his bedroom and ran for the cottage door, only to find it locked. The key. Where was the key? Mrs. Blackwood appeared at the bedroom doorway, breathing heavily. "Looking for this?" she asked, dangling his door key from her fingers. "I've been taking precautions since Mr. Collins' unfortunate attempt to flee. The windows are barred as well." James backed away as she advanced. His eyes darted around the room, searching for a weapon, an escape route, anything. His gaze fell on the lamp in his hand, his only chance. "I'm truly sorry it has to be this way, Mrs. Blackwood said, retrieving something from her pocket. It was a small vial. "I'd hoped you'd come willingly to tomorrow night's ceremony. The children were so looking forward to it. Especially Margaret. She's to assist me now that she's of age." "Margaret is involved in this?" James asked, stalling for time as he edged toward the fireplace where a poker stood. "The Winters family has served mine for generations. They understand the necessity of what I do." Mrs. Blackwood uncorked the vial. "One drop of this in your evening tea would have been enough, but I suppose I'll have to be more direct now." As she lunged forward, James swung the lamp at her. It shattered against her outstretched arm, spraying kerosene and broken glass. Mrs. Blackwood screamed as her sleeve caught fire. The flames spread quickly to the curtains as she flailed in panic. James seized the moment. He grabbed the fireplace poker and smashed it against the window, again and again until the glass cracked and the iron bars loosened. Behind him, Mrs. Blackwood's screams turned to a horrible gurgling as the fire engulfed her. The room filled with smoke as James finally broke through the window and squeezed his body through the narrow opening. Sharp glass tore at his clothes and skin, but adrenaline dulled the pain. He tumbled onto the ground outside just as the cottage erupted into an inferno. Staggering to his feet, James ran toward the woods away from the Blackwood estate. Behind him, he heard shouting as people responded to the blaze. He didn't look back, even when he thought he heard a child's laughter mingling with the roar of the flames. Dawn was breaking when James finally reached the railroad station, miles from Redwood Valley. His clothes were torn and bloodied, his lungs burning from smoke and exertion. When the morning train arrived, he boarded it with nothing but the clothes on his back and the terrible knowledge of what had happened in the valley. James Harper was never seen in Redwood Valley again. In the days that followed, authorities investigating the fire discovered a network of tunnels beneath the Blackwood estate, leading to a cellar room where they found the remains of at least 5 adults and 4 children. Eleanor Blackwood was buried in her family plot alongside her son William, who had died of scarlet fever in 1898 at the age of 9. No record was ever found explaining the identity of the other victims. The following spring, a new advertisement appeared in the Eastern Educator's Gazette. "Teacher needed in prosperous Kentucky community. Room and board provided. Inquire at Redwood Valley School Board." And though the Blackwood estate stood empty, those passing by on moonlit nights sometimes reported seeing a woman in black leading a group of small figures across the grounds toward the family cemetery where fresh flowers mysteriously appeared on William's grave every morning. Detective Michael Sullivan arrived in Redwood Valley 2 weeks after the fire. A veteran of the Louisville Police Department, he had been assigned to investigate the mysterious deaths at the Blackwood estate after state authorities had taken an interest in the case. The autumn chill had deepened into early winter, and frost covered the ground as Sullivan's automobile navigated the winding road into the valley. He had read the preliminary reports: a fire at a cottage on the Blackwood property, remains found in a hidden cellar, and a missing teacher who had fled the scene. The local sheriff had ruled it a tragic accident combined with the deranged actions of Eleanor Blackwood. But the governor had been pressured by powerful Boston families to look deeper. One of the missing teachers, Patricia Abernathy, was the niece of a Massachusetts state senator. Sullivan parked outside the valley's only hotel, a modest 2-story building overlooking the main street. The town appeared unnaturally quiet, curtains drawn despite the morning hour. Few people on the streets, and those who were outside hurried about their business with downcast eyes. At the sheriff's office, Sullivan received a cool reception from Sheriff Tanner, a burly man with a permanently furrowed brow. "Don't see why Louisville needed to send someone," Tanner grumbled as he reluctantly shared his files. "Case is pretty straightforward. Mrs. Blackwood lost her mind after her boy died. Started killing folks she thought could replace him. Harper figured it out and set that fire trying to escape. End of story." "And the body's in the cellar?" Sullivan pressed. "Like I said, she was killing folks. Teachers who came to work here, a couple of families that tried to leave town. She had help from the Winters family, old Elias and his granddaughter. We've got them both locked up awaiting trial." Sullivan flipped through the sparse documentation. "I'd like to speak with them." Sheriff Tanner shrugged. "Suit yourself. Elias ain't talking much. Girl's not right in the head keeps talking about William Blackwood like he's still alive." The cells were located in the back of the sheriff's office. Margaret Winters sat on a narrow cot, her once-neat hair hanging limply around her pale face. She looked up as Sullivan approached, her eyes haunted. "Another one," she whispered. "He'll send another one." Sullivan pulled up a chair. "Who will send another one, Margaret?" "William?" Her voice was barely audible. "He's angry now. The fire purified Mrs. Blackwood, but he lost his new friends in the flames." "Tell me about William," Sullivan encouraged gently. Margaret's eyes darted to the corners of the cell as if checking for eavesdroppers. "He died long ago, but he never left. Mrs. Blackwood kept him here with the rituals. She taught my grandmother, who taught me." Her fingers twisted in her lap. "We prepared the tea, speak the words, and those who drink it belong to William forever. And James Harper." "Did he drink the tea?" She shook her head. "He was suspicious. Mrs. Blackwood had to try another way. But the fire... Her face contorted with anguish. The fire changed everything. William's vessel was destroyed. His vessel? Mrs. Blackwood's body. She let him use it sometimes to speak through her. Now he's angry, searching." Sullivan made notes, uncertain whether he was dealing with mass hysteria or something more sinister. "What about the other teachers? Collins, Abernathy, Finch, Patterson?" "They're with William now. In the ground, but not gone." Margaret leaned forward suddenly. "You shouldn't have come here, Detective. William has already chosen you." A chill ran down Sullivan's spine despite his professional skepticism. "Chosen me for what?" Margaret's lips curled into an unsettling smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "To be his new vessel, of course. He needs a strong one this time. Someone who can bring him more friends." Later that afternoon, Sullivan visited the ruins of the Blackwood estate. The main house had survived the fire, but the cottage was a blackened shell. Yellow police tape surrounded the property, though Sullivan doubted many locals would dare trespass regardless. The family cemetery sat on a small hill behind the mansion. Sullivan counted the headstones. William Blackwood died 1898. Harold Blackwood, Eleanor's second husband, died 1900. And Eleanor herself, the most recent addition. Surrounding these marked graves were 5 small plots with simple stone markers bearing no names or dates. As Sullivan examined the anonymous graves, he noticed fresh footprints in the soils mall, like a child's leading from the cemetery to the mansion's back door. The door stood slightly ajar. Against his better judgment, Sullivan followed the prints inside. The grand house was silent except for the occasional creaking of timber. Dust covered the furniture in the entrance hall, undisturbed except for a single path of small footprints leading up the main staircase. At the top of the stairs, the trail continued down a long hallway to a closed door at the end. A child's drawing had been pinned to the wood, a crude depiction of a man who looked unsettlingly like Sullivan himself, standing beside a black figure with no face. Sullivan's hand hesitated on the doorknob. In his 15 years of police work, he had never experienced the foreboding that now washed over him. But he was a detective, and answers lay beyond this door. The room beyond was a child's bedroom, preserved as if its occupant had just stepped out. Toys from the previous century were arranged neatly on shelves. A model train set occupied one corner. On the bed lay a leather-bound book, a diary. Sullivan opened it carefully. The first entry was dated 1898, written in a child's uneven hand. Mother says I must write in this diary every day. I am very sick. The doctor says the fever might take me, but Mother won't allow it. She says she knows a way to keep me here forever. The entries continued for several pages, detailing William's deteriorating health and his mother's increasingly desperate measures to save him, consultations with a woman from New Orleans who practiced old magic, the preparation of strange teas and ointments, and rituals performed at midnight in the family cemetery. The final entry, dated the day of William's death according to his headstone, read simply, "I died today, but Mother says it doesn't matter. I can stay as long as she gives me new friends. I'll never be alone again." The pages that followed were filled with different handwriting, adult hands, childish scrawls, all recording the same disturbing message over and over. I belong to William now. I belong to William forever. The most recent entry was dated the day after the fire. Mother's vessel is gone. I need a new one. The detective will do nicely. Sullivan slammed the book shut, his heart racing. He turned to leave and found himself face to face with Elias Winters, who stood in the doorway holding an old-fashioned service revolver. "You shouldn't have come here," the old man said sadly. "Margaret told you, didn't she? William has chosen you. How did you get out of your cell?" Sullivan demanded, his hand moving toward his own weapon. "Sheriff Tanner is family. He understands the covenant." Elias raised the gun. "Drink the tea, detective. It's easier that way. Fight, and William takes you anyway, but it hurts more." Sullivan lunged just as Elias fired. The bullet grazed his arm as he tackled the old man to the floor. They struggled briefly before Sullivan gained the upper hand, disarming Elias and restraining him with handcuffs from his coat pocket. "It's over, Elias," Sullivan panted. "Whatever hold the Blackwoods had on this town died with Eleanor." "Nothing dies in Redwood Valley," Elias replied, his eyes fixed on something over Sullivan's shoulder. "Nothing that belongs to William." Sullivan turned and saw a small figure standing in the shadows of the hallway, the silhouette of a child. "William?" he called out uncertainly. The figure stepped forward, and Sullivan found himself looking at Margaret Winters, her face unnaturally calm, her eyes empty. "William is here, detective," she said in a voice that was not her own. "William is always here." From downstairs came the sound of the front door opening, followed by multiple footsteps. Sullivan recognized Sheriff Tanner's voice calling his name. "Up here, Sheriff!" Sullivan shouted, keeping his eyes on Margaret. "I've got Elias Winters and his granddaughter." The footsteps grew closer. Margaret's lips curled into a smile that seemed to transform her entire face into something inhuman. "They're not coming to help you," the child voice said through her. "They're coming to help me." As the footsteps reached the top of the stairs, Sullivan made a split-second decision. He shoved past Margaret and ran for the window at the end of the hall. Behind him, Sheriff Tanner and two deputies appeared, their expressions blank, their movements synchronized like puppets on strings. Sullivan crashed through the window, landing painfully on the sloped roof below. He slid down the shingles and dropped to the ground, his injured arms screaming in protest. Without looking back, he ran for his automobile. The engine roared to life as figures emerged from the mansion. Tanner, his deputies, Elias somehow freed from his restraints, and Margaret leading them like a bizarre Pied Piper. Their movements were jerky, unnatural as they pursued him down the driveway. Sullivan sped away from the Blackwood estate, gravel spraying behind his wheels. In his rearview mirror, he saw the group stop at the property line, watching him escape with identical expressions of cold fury. He didn't slow until he had left Redwood Valley far behind, in Louisville. He filed his report, a clinical account of Eleanor Blackwood's murderous psychosis and its influence on the impressionable townsfolk. He made no mention of William's diary or the child voice that had spoken through Margaret Winters. Such things had no place in an official police report. 2 weeks later, Sullivan requested a transfer to the Chicago Police Department. His superiors were puzzled by his insistence on leaving Kentucky, but they granted his request. On his final night in Louisville, a package arrived at his hotel room, a small wooden box containing a child's drawing of Detective Sullivan sleeping peacefully in a grave alongside 5 unmarked stones, and a note in childish handwriting. "You can leave the valley, detective, but the valley never leaves you. William finds his friends no matter how far they run." That night, Sullivan dreamed of a boy in turn-of-the-century clothing, standing at the foot of his bed and offering him a cup of tea. 5 years had passed since the events at Redwood Valley. Chicago's winter winds howled outside Michael Sullivan's apartment as he pored over case files. After his transfer, he had risen quickly through the ranks, becoming known for solving cases that others deemed impossible. His colleagues attributed his success to an uncanny intuition. Sullivan seemed to know things he shouldn't, as if guided by an invisible hand. What they didn't know was that Sullivan's nights were plagued by dreams of William Blackwood. The dead boy whispered to him while he slept, showing him clues, revealing killers' hiding places, guiding his investigations with supernatural precision. Each solved case came at a price. William's influence grew stronger. The boundary between dreams and waking life increasingly blurred. Sullivan had tried to escape at alcohol, sleeping pills, even a brief stay in a sanitarium under a false name. Nothing worked. William was always waiting when he closed his eyes. "Help me find more friends, detective. Help me and I'll help you." Tonight Sullivan stared at a telegram that had arrived that morning. Redwood Valley incidents recurring. 5 missing in past month. Your expertise required. Governor insists. He crumpled the paper in his fist. He had sworn never to return to Kentucky, yet he had always known this day would come. William had told him so. 2 days later, Sullivan's train pulled into the familiar station at Redwood Valley. The platform was empty except for a young deputy who introduced himself as Officer Jenkins. "Sheriff Tanner passed away 3 years ago," Jenkins explained as they drove toward town. "Heart attack," they said. "New sheriff's not from around here, name's Calloway." Sullivan noted the changes in the Villain new buildings in town. A paved main street, automobiles parked where horses had once been tied. Progress had found even this isolated community. "And the Blackwood estate?" Sullivan asked, trying to keep his voice casual. "Abandoned officially, though folks say someone's been living there. New owner bought it at auction last year, some businessman from New York who's never bothered to visit. Caretaker checks on it once a month." Jenkins glanced at Sullivan. "That's where the disappearances started. Caretaker found signs of squatters. Next thing we know, people are going missing." Sheriff Calloway was waiting at the station, a no-nonsense woman in her 40s with short-cropped hair and suspicious eyes. She led Sullivan to a back office where photos and reports covered a bulletin board. 5 missing in total, she explained. 2 children who were seen playing near the Blackwood property. A journalist from Louisville investigating the old murders. Drifter passing through town. And my deputy Carter, who went up there 3 days ago and never came back. "Any connections to the Winters family?" Sullivan asked. Calloway shook her head. "Elias died in prison 2 years ago. Margaret was committed to the state asylum after her trial. She's still there as far as I know." She studied Sullivan carefully. "The file says you were here for the original investigation. Found some diary that sent you running for Chicago?" Sullivan maintained a neutral expression. The diary was just the ramblings of a disturbed child and his equally disturbed mother. Nothing supernatural about it, if that's what you're asking. "I'm not asking about supernatural, detective. I'm asking why a decorated officer fled to Chicago after one case, and why he looks like he hasn't slept properly in years." Before Sullivan could respond, Jenkins burst into the office. "Sheriff, they found another one little girl missing from the Henderson farm. Parents say she was talking about a new friend named William before she disappeared." Sullivan felt the blood drain from his face. At night in his hotel room, he couldn't bring himself to sleep. William would be waiting, more powerful than ever. Instead, Sullivan sat by the window watching the distant silhouette of the Blackwood mansion on the hill outside town. Around midnight, a light appeared in one of the mansion's upper windows, William's old bedroom. Sullivan watched, transfixed, as the light moved from room to room, as if someone were searching the house with a lantern. Decision made, Sullivan retrieved his revolver and slipped out into the night. He would end this, whatever this once and for all. The Blackwood estate was even more imposing in the darkness. Vines had claimed much of the exterior, and many windows were broken or boarded over. The front door hung partially open, swaying gently in the night breeze. Sullivan entered cautiously, his gun drawn, following the distant glow that still moved through the upper floors. The grand staircase creaked beneath his weight as he ascended. The light had stopped moving now, remaining stationary in what Sullivan remembered as William's bedroom. The door to the boys' room stood open. Inside, Margaret Winters sat on the edge of the bed, a kerosene lamp at her side, calmly brushing the hair of a small girl who could only be the missing Henderson child. Both looked up as Sullivan entered, their faces eerily serene. "Margaret, how did you get out of the asylum?" Sullivan kept his gun trained on her. Margaret smiled, the same unnatural smile he remembered from years ago. "William brought me home, detective, just as he's finally brought you home." "Let the girl go," Sullivan demanded. "She's happy here," Margaret replied, continuing to brush the child's hair. "All of William's friends are happy. You will be too once you stop fighting him." "Where are the others?" "The journalist, the deputy?" Margaret gestured to the window. "In the cemetery with the rest of the family. There's room for so many more." Sullivan moved toward the child, intending to take her to safety, but stopped when he saw her eyes vacant, hollow, like Margaret's, but somehow worse. Her small hand clutched a teacup. "You're too late," Margaret whispered. "She already belongs to William. They all do. And soon you will too. You've carried him with you all these years, detective. Every case you solved, every criminal you caught, that was William working through you, preparing you. Preparing me for what? To be his true vessel. Mrs. Blackwood was weak. I am temporary. But you have the strength he needs to bring everyone in the valley to him. She set down the hairbrush. It's already happening. You feel him inside your mind, directing your thoughts, showing you things no living man should know. Sullivan's hand trembled. It was true. Even now he could feel Williams's presence stronger than ever, a cold weight behind his eyes, a voice whispering at the edge of his consciousness. "Fight it, detective," a new voice said from the doorway. Sullivan turned to see Sheriff Calloway, her own weapon drawn. "Calloway? How did you—" "I had Jenkins follow you. He's outside calling for backup." Her eyes darted between Sullivan, Margaret, and the child. "Step away from them, detective." Margaret laughed, a child's laugh from a woman's throat. "Another friend for William?" She reached beneath the bed and withdrew a revolver. Sullivan recognized it as belonging to the missing deputy. Time slowed as Margaret raised the gun toward Calloway. Sullivan saw the sheriff begin to squeeze her trigger, saw Margaret's finger tighten as well. He felt William surge within him, urging him to let Calloway die, to accept his role as vessel. In that frozen moment, Sullivan made his choice. He lunged between the women, his body intercepting both bullets simultaneously. Margaret's shot struck his chest. Calloway's hit his shoulder. The impact threw him against the wall, his own unfired gun clattering to the floor. As consciousness faded, Sullivan felt a curious lightness. William's presence, which had haunted him for 5 years, was receding, howling in frustrated rage as it withdrew. The dead boy had failed. There would be no vessel, no more friends, no continued existence. Sullivan's last sight was Sheriff Calloway wrestling Margaret to the ground while the Henderson child sat motionless, still clutching her teacup, still staring with empty eyes. St. Agnes's Hospital for the Mentally Disturbed stood on the outskirts of Louisville, its red brick walls and barred windows a stark contrast to the pastoral countryside surrounding it. For the past month, it had been Michael Sullivan's home ever since he had been transferred from Redwood. Valley's small medical clinic, after being declared stable enough to travel, Dr. Eleanor Weiss reviewed Sullivan's file for the 3rd time that morning. His case was unusual. 2 gunshot wounds, neither fatal, but accompanied by a complete psychological break. According to the notes from Sheriff Calloway, Sullivan had been investigating a series of disappearances connected to the infamous Blackwood case from 5 years earlier when he was shot intervening in a confrontation. The physical wounds were healing well, but Sullivan's mental state remained fragmented. He alternated between periods of complete lucidity and episodes where he spoke in multiple voices, including that of a young boy. During these episodes, he would recite details of murders and missing persons cases from across the country, details that, when verified, proved unnervingly accurate. "How is our detective today?" Dr. Weiss asked the attendant outside Sullivan's private room. "Quiet, ma'am. Been drawing all morning." Dr. Weiss entered to find Sullivan sitting by the window, sketchpad on his lap. Its once robust frame had grown gaunt, his hair prematurely gray. He looked up as she approached, his eyes clear and focused, a good sign. "Good morning, Detective Sullivan. May I see what you're working on?" Sullivan handed her the pad without hesitation. The page showed a detailed sketch of a Victorian mansion, the Blackwood estate. Dr. Weiss presumed, with small figures scattered across the grounds. Each figure had been carefully labeled with a name and date. "These are the missing persons?" she asked gently. Sullivan nodded. "All of them."
"William's friends?"
His voice was steady. "There are 57 in total, going back to 1898. And William is the boy you believe has been ... influencing you." "Not anymore." Sullivan tapped his chest where the bullet had struck. "He's gone now. The bullet severed the connection somehow." He smiled faintly. "I haven't dreamed since that night. The first time in 5 years I've known peace." Dr. Weiss studied the drawing more carefully. The names and dates matched known disappearances from Redwood Valley, but there were many more that she didn't recognize. "Some of these people disappeared from other places," Sullivan explained, noting her confusion. "William's reach extended beyond the valley. Through me, through others he influenced. I solved cases because he showed me where the bodies were hidden. I didn't understand I was helping him claim more friends in Margaret Winters. She believed she was carrying William's spirit as well." Sullivan's expression darkened. Margaret was groomed from childhood by Eleanor Blackwood. The tea ceremonies, the rituals in the cemetery, they created a collective delusion that spread through the valley like a disease. Vulnerable minds were susceptible. I was vulnerable. Yet you believe you're free now. I know I am. His hand moved unconsciously to the healing wound on his chest. Death couldn't claim me, so William had to let go. Doctor. Weiss made notes in his file. Sullivan's current interpretation that he had been suffering from a folie à deux, a shared psychotic disorder transmitted from Margaret Winters, was far healthier than his previous insistence that a dead boy's ghost had been possessing him. Progress, however, unorthodox. There's something else you should see, Sullivan said, turning to a new page in his sketchbook. This drawing showed the Blackwood family cemetery with its 8 marked graves, the original 3 Blackwoods, plus 5 new headstones that hadn't existed during Sullivan's first visit to Redwood Valley. Sheriff Calloway found them after arresting Margaret, Sullivan explained. Fresh graves recently dug. The missing journalist, the drifter, the deputy, and 2 children from town, and the Henderson girl. The one you rescued? Sullivan's eyes clouded, drank the tea. Whatever was in it, probably some hallucinogenic herb that Eleanor Blackwood learned about from that New Orleans woman. It affected her mind. She's here somewhere, isn't she? In the children's ward? Dr. Weiss nodded reluctantly. Hospital confidentiality typically prevented sharing such information, but Sullivan's insight into the case made him a unique resource. She hasn't spoken since that night. The same is true of Margaret Winters. They're both in a catatonic state. The delusion collapsed when I survived, Sullivan mused. William's influence depended on absolute belief. When I rejected him with my actions, the entire structure fractured. Dr. Weiss wanted to believe this rational explanation, but something still troubled her. Detective, there's one thing I don't understand. If this was all a delusion, how do you explain the accurate information you had about cases across the country? Cases you couldn't possibly have known about. Sullivan closed his sketchbook. That's what I've been trying to figure out myself. The human mind is capable of remarkable things under stress. Perhaps I unconsciously picked up details from police bulletins, newspaper articles, conversations overheard and forgotten. And the diary. Sheriff Calloway mentioned a diary found at the Blackwood estate, a fabrication. Eleanor Blackwood writing in different hands to strengthen her own delusion. Sullivan's voice held steady, but Dr. Weiss noticed a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. It had to be. Their session ended shortly after, with Dr. Weiss noting significant improvement. If Sullivan continued this trajectory, she might recommend his release within weeks. That evening, as Sullivan prepared for bed, a nurse delivered a small package that had arrived for him. No sender address, she explained. It was left at the front desk. Alone in his room, Sullivan unwrapped the package to find a familiar leather-bound book, William's diary. A pressed flower marked a new page, filled with fresh handwriting that Sullivan recognized as his own, though he had no memory of writing it. I let the detective think he's free. It's easier this way. He'll leave this place soon, carrying me with him. The woman doctor will be my first new friend. Then we'll return to the valley where the others are waiting. William always finds a way back to his friends. Sullivan's hands trembled as he flipped to the last page of the diary. There, a child's drawing depicted the Blackwood estate restored to its former glory, surrounded by dozens of small figures with X's for eyes. In the center stood a man who looked like Sullivan, holding hands with a small boy dressed in the fashion of 1898. At the bottom, written in a childish scrawl, "See you in your dreams, detective." That night, for the first time since being shot, Michael Sullivan dreamed of William Blackwood. The dead boy sat at the foot of his bed, smiling. "You didn't think a bullet could keep us apart, did you, detective? We have so much work to do." In her office, Dr. Weiss reviewed her notes on Sullivan's case before heading home. His recovery had been remarkable, perhaps too remarkable. She made a note to review his night medication and schedule additional sessions. As she packed her briefcase, a small wooden doll appeared on her desk, a doll she was certain hadn't been there moments before. It wore a tiny noose around its neck. The old mining tunnels beneath Redwood Valley had been sealed off after the collapse that killed Harold Blackwood and 3 workers in 1900. Few remembered they existed at all, a labyrinth of narrow passages stretching beneath the valley floor, connecting to the cellars of the older buildings, including the Blackwood estate. Sheriff Rebecca Calloway shined her flashlight into the darkness of the tunnel entrance they had discovered behind a false wall in the Blackwood cellar. The beam illuminated crude wooden supports, rusted rail tracks, and the damp, moss-covered stone walls. The air that wafted out was cold and stale, carrying the faint scent of decay. "You sure about this, Sheriff?" Deputy Jenkins asked nervously. "We've already found the bodies of the missing folks in the cemetery." "Not all of them," Calloway replied grimly. The Henderson girl mentioned others before she stopped speaking, children who went missing years ago, before any of us came to this valley. If she was telling the truth, she left the thought unfinished as she ducked into the tunnel, gun drawn. Jenkins followed reluctantly along with Dr. Martin, the county medical examiner. The tunnel sloped gently downward, branching occasionally into side passages that Calloway marked with chalk. Water dripped from the ceiling, and their footsteps echoed ominously in the confined space. They had been walking for nearly 20 minutes when the tunnel widened into a larger chamber. Calloway's flashlight revealed mining equipment. Picks, shovels, helmets preserved as if the miners had just stepped away. But it was what lay beyond the equipment that made Jenkins gasp and Dr. Martin curse under his breath. Along the far wall, arranged in a row, were 7 small beds, child-sized, each with restraints attached to the metal frames. Beside each bed stood a small table bearing a teacup and a crude wooden doll with a noose around its neck. "My God," Dr. Martin whispered. "What happened here?" Calloway approached the nearest bed, her flashlight revealing rust-colored stains on the thin mattress. "I think we've found where it began. Not with Eleanor Blackwood, but with her husband. These tunnels connect to the estate. He could have been bringing children down here for years. And Eleanor continued after his death," Jenkins added, his voice shaky. "Maybe William wasn't the innocent victim we thought. Maybe he was part of it from the beginning." Dr. Martin examined one of the teacups. "I'll need to test the residue, but I'd wager it contains some kind of hallucinogenic compound. Combined with sensory deprivation down here, it could induce extreme suggestibility, even shared hallucinations." Calloway's flashlight beam caught something carved into the stone wall above the beds, a crude image of a tall figure holding hands with 7 smaller ones. Below it, words had been etched into the rock. "William's friends stay forever, Sheriff," Jenkins called from deeper in the chamber. "There's something else here." He stood before what appeared to be a small shrine, photographs of children arranged around a central image of William Blackwood taken before his death. Surrounding the shrine were personal effects: hair ribbons, small toys, pieces of clothing, trophies taken from victims. "Some of these pictures go back to the 1880s, Jenkins said. "This didn't start with Harold Blackwood. It started with the Blackwood family," Calloway realized. "The whole twisted legacy. William wasn't the first victim, he was just another link in the chain." As they continued to explore, they discovered a small door at the back of the chamber. Beyond it lay a narrow passage that descended even deeper beneath the valley. "We should go back, get more deputies," Jenkins suggested, eyeing the dark passage uneasily. Calloway shook her head. "Whatever's down there has waited too long already." The passage led to another chamber, smaller than the first, but somehow more disturbing. Here the walls were covered with hundreds of childish drawings, scenes of torture, of rituals performed in the cemetery, of a boy named William growing from victim to tormentor. In the center of the room stood a stone altar, its surface stained dark with what could only be decades of dried blood. Atop it lay a leather-bound book, much older than the diary Sullivan had found, its pages yellow with age, its cover cracked and worn. Dr. Martin opened it carefully. "It's a journal," he said, scanning the first page. "Dated 1849, written by Thomas Blackwood, William's grandfather." The journal detailed the founding of Redwood Valley and the establishment of the Blackwood coal mine. But between mundane business entries were disturbing accounts of an old ritual Thomas had discovered during his travels in Europe, a ritual promising wealth and power to those who provided young vessels for an entity he called only the Waiting One. The final pages described Thomas's disappointment with his son Harold, who lacked the necessary commitment to our benefactor, and his hope that his grandson William would prove more suitable. "So that's how it began," Calloway said quietly. "A deal with ... something for wealth and power. Paid for with children's lives. But what about Sullivan?" Jenkins asked. "How does he fit into all this?" Before Calloway could answer, a noise echoed from the tunnel behind them, footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching their position. "Jenkins?" Calloway called out, confused, as her deputy was standing right beside her. "Not Jenkins," a familiar voice replied from the darkness. "Hello, Sheriff Calloway." Michael Sullivan emerged into the chamber, looking remarkably recovered from his wounds. He wore a hospital bathrobe over street clothes, and his eyes held a clarity that was almost unnerving. "Sullivan, what are you doing here? You should be in St. Agnes." "I checked myself out," Sullivan replied with a small smile. "I had a dream that you'd be here today, discovering the truth at last. I thought you might need my help." "How did you even know about this place?" Dr. Martin demanded. "William showed me. In my dreams." Sullivan approached the altar, running his fingers across its stained surface. "This is where it happened. Where Thomas Blackwood made his bargain. Where Harold continued the tradition. Where Eleanor learned to bind the spirits of the dead to the living. You're not well," Detective Calloway said gently, noting the feverish gleam in Sullivan's eyes. "Let us take you back to the hospital." Sullivan laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "I've never been more well, Sheriff. For the first time, I understand everything." He tapped his temple. "William showed me not just the past, but the future, too." "And what future is that?" Calloway asked, her hand moving slowly toward her holstered gun. "Redwood Valley restored to its true purpose. The ritual completed properly this time. Sullivan's voice dropped to a whisper. The waiting one is patient, Sheriff. It's been gathering strength for over 70 years. All those children vessels prepared, but never properly used. As Sullivan spoke, Calloway noticed something disturbing. His shadow on the wall behind him seemed wrong somehow. Too small for his frame, shaped more like a child than a grown man. The bullet didn't free me, Sullivan continued, its voice taking on an odd dual quality as if two people were speaking simultaneously. It completed the connection. I am William now, and William is me. The perfect vessel at last. In one fluid motion, Calloway drew her gun. Step away from the altar, Sullivan. Sullivan's smile widened unnaturally. You can't stop what's already begun, Sheriff. Look around you. To her horror, Calloway realized the chamber was no longer empty. Shadowy figures had appeared in the periphery of their flashlight beams, small, child-sized silhouettes with glowing eyes. Jenkins shouted in terror and fired his weapon at the nearest figure. The bullet passed through it harmlessly, striking the stone wall beyond. William's friends, Sullivan explained calmly, waiting for the ritual to be completed, waiting for the waiting one to give them new purpose. Run, Calloway ordered Jenkins and Dr. Martin. Get to the surface, seal the tunnel. As the two men fled, Sullivan made no move to stop them. His attention remained fixed on Calloway, his eyes now glowing with the same eerie light as the shadowy children surrounding them. You could join us, Sheriff, he offered, his voice now completely childlike despite coming from Sullivan's adult body. There's always room for more friends. This ends now, William, Calloway declared, her gun unwavering. Whatever you are, whatever's been happening in this valley, it stops today. Sullivan sighed with exaggerated disappointment. That's what the detective thought too, before he understood, before he accepted me. He took a step forward. The bullet that should have killed him opened the final door instead. And now, we just need one more sacrifice to complete what Thomas Blackwood started all those years ago. The shadowy figures began to close in around Calloway. She fired at Sullivan, but he moved with impossible speed, dodging the bullet. In the next instant he was upon her, his hands closing around her throat with inhuman strength. The waiting one has chosen you, Sheriff, William's voice hissed from Sullivan's mouth. The final vessel before the valley becomes his domain forever. As darkness began to cloud Calloway's vision, she fumbled in her pocket for the one item she had brought specifically for this confrontation. Small glass vial of holy water blessed by every church in the county, a precaution that had seemed foolish until this moment. With her last strength, she smashed the vial against Sullivan's face. The liquid sizzled against his skin, and he recoiled with an inhuman shriek. Not Sullivan's voice, not even William's, but something far older and more terrible. Calloway didn't wait to see more. She ran, following the chalk marks she had left earlier, pursued by Sullivan's agonized howls and the whispers of countless children echoing through the tunnels. Behind her, the temperature in the ritual chamber began to drop precipitously as William Sullivan writhed on the floor. Frost formed on the altar, spreading across the walls, encasing the ancient journal in ice. The shadowy children flickered and distorted, their forms elongating into something no longer recognizable as human. You cannot escape the waiting one. A voice thundered through the tunnels, shaking loose dirt and small stones from the ceiling. The ritual will be completed. Calloway emerged from the tunnel entrance in the Blackwood cellar, gasping for breath. Jenkins and Dr. Martin were waiting with 3 additional deputies, all armed. Seal it, she ordered between ragged breaths. Seal it now. The men worked quickly, using dynamite they had brought as a precaution to collapse the tunnel entrance. As the dust settled, an unearthly wail echoed briefly before being cut off by the final rockfall. In the silence that followed, Dr. Martin turned to Calloway. Do you think that's the end of it? She stared at the sealed tunnel, remembering the ancient evil she had glimpsed in Sullivan's transformed eyes. No, she answered truthfully, but it buys us time. That night, every child in Redwood Valley dreamed of a boy named William, crying alone in the darkness beneath the earth, promising friendship that would last forever if they would only come and help him dig. In the state asylum, Margaret Winters and the Henderson girl both awoke simultaneously from their catatonic states, their eyes glowing in the darkness of their rooms, their voices speaking in unison. The waiting one still waits. William still waits. The ritual is only delayed, not stopped. And deep beneath Redwood Valley, something ancient stirred in its partial freedom, biding its time until the next Blackwood would come to continue what Thomas had begun in 1849, a pact written in children's blood, a doorway opened that could never truly be closed. 1 year after the sealing of the mine tunnels, Redwood Valley had begun to heal. Sheriff Calloway had overseen the destruction of the Blackwood estate, every brick torn down, Every timber burned, the ground sown with salt in a ritual that combined Christian, Jewish, and Native American traditions. The town council had declared the entire hillside off-limits, surrounding it with a high fence topped with crosses fashioned from local iron. For months there had been no strange occurrences, no missing children, no whispers of William Blackwood or the entity that Thomas Blackwood had called the Waiting One. Life had largely returned to normal. Though old-timers noted that the valley's namesake redwoods seemed to be dying, their once vibrant foliage turning brown and brittle despite the wet spring. Sheriff Calloway kept her vigil nonetheless. Each night she walked the perimeter of the quarantine property, checking for breaches in the fence or signs of trespassers. And each night she left offerings at the gate: salt, iron nails, and herbs recommended by a specialist in occult matters, who had come from New Orleans, the great-granddaughter of the same woman who had first instructed Eleanor Blackwood in the dark arts. Tonight, as she completed her rounds, Calloway noticed a small figure standing by the main gate, a child, perhaps 10 years old, staring through the bars at the barren hillside beyond. "It's past curfew, son," she called, approaching carefully. The town had instituted a sunset curfew for anyone under 18, one of many precautions still in place. The boy turned, and Calloway recognized Thomas Jenkins, Deputy Jenkins's son. "Sorry, Sheriff. I was just looking." "At what?" The boy pointed toward the hillside. "At the children. They stand there every night watching the town. They look sad." Calloway felt a chill despite the warm June air. "What children, Thomas?" "The ones no one else can see." He looked up at her with innocent eyes. "They talk to me in my dreams. They say they're William's friends, and that they need more friends to complete the circle." Calloway knelt to the boy's level. "Thomas, I need you to be honest with me. Have you ever seen a boy named William in your dreams?" Thomas nodded. "He's nice. He says he's trapped and needs my help. He says if I bring 7 friends to the old cemetery at midnight on Midsummer's Eve, he can come back and take us to a special place where we'll be happy forever." "And when is Midsummer's Eve, Thomas?" "Tomorrow night," the boy replied. "William says it has to be tomorrow because that's when the door can open again." Calloway escorted Thomas's home immediately, explaining the situation to a horrified Deputy Jenkins. By midnight, she had gathered the parents of every child in town for an emergency meeting in the church. "It's not over," she told the assembled crowd. "Whatever was trapped in those tunnels is trying to reach the children through their dreams." "What can we do?" a mother asked, clutching her young daughter protectively. "Tonight, no child sleeps alone," Calloway instructed. "Tomorrow we evacuate everyone under the age of 18. My deputies will escort the school bus to Louisville, where arrangements have been made with the authorities there. The children will remain in the city until we determine it's safe for them to return." "And when will that be?" someone shouted from the back. Calloway had no answer. How could she explain her growing certainty that Redwood Valley would never be truly safe? That the corruption ran too deep, seeping into the soil and water, infecting the very air they breathed. By dawn, word had spread through town. Parents packed overnight bags for their children, preparing them for what was described as an emergency vacation. Few questioned the sheriff's orders. The memory of the Blackwood horrors was still too fresh. As the children boarded the buses under the watchful eyes of armed deputies, Calloway noticed several of them looking toward the hillside with expressions of longing. They could see something there that the adults could not, with the children safely away. Calloway gathered a team of volunteers, men and women who had lived in the valley all their lives and understood the evil they faced. Together, they reinforced the perimeter around the former Blackwood property and prepared for the night ahead. "Whatever happens," she instructed them, "no one approaches that hillside after dark. If you see anything, children, lights, William Blackwood himself, you fire a warning shot and call for backup. But you do not investigate alone." As twilight fell on Midsummer's Eve, its unnatural silence descended upon Redwood Valley. Birds ceased their evening songs, insects fell quiet, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Calloway took her position at the main gate, shotgun loaded with special shells containing blessed salt and iron filings, another recommendation from the New Orleans specialist. Deputy Jenkins manned the eastern perimeter while volunteers covered the remaining approaches. At precisely midnight, a low humming began to emanate from the hillside. The earth trembled slightly underfoot, and a cold mist rose from the ground where the Blackwood mansion had once stood. "Hold your positions," Calloway called out, raising her shotgun as the mist coalesced into vaguely human shapes, small, child-sized figures that danced and spun in an eerie, silent procession. Through her binoculars, Calloway could see that each misty figure wore a noose around its neck. They formed a circle around the site of the old family cemetery, their movements becoming more frenzied as the minutes passed. From the center of the circle, a larger shape began to form, Not a child, but a man. Even from a distance, Calloway recognized Michael Sullivan's profile, though his body had never been recovered from the collapsed tunnel. "Sheriff!" Jenkins called through his radio. "The fence is freezing over on my side." Calloway looked down to see frost forming on the iron bars of the gate, spreading rapidly despite the summer heat. The metal groaned and contracted, weakening. "Fall back to secondary positions," she ordered. "Maintain the perimeter at all costs," as her team retreated to their backup locations. The ghostly figures on the hillside began to chant, their voices carrying impossibly through the night air. 7 friends for William's circle, 7 souls to turn the key, 7 hearts to feed the waiting one, 7 minds to set him free. The Sullivan figure raised its arms, and the ground where the mansion's cellar had been filled with an unearthly blue light. The chanting grew louder, more desperate, as the light pulsed in rhythm with the words. Calloway felt a presence beside her and spun around, shotgun raised. Thomas Jenkins stood there, along with 6 other children from town, all of whom should have been on buses to Louisville. "Thomas? How did you get back here?" The boy's eyes were vacant, his voice flat. "William called us home. We're the 7 friends he needs." "Where are the deputies who were escorting you?" "Sleeping," another child answered in the same emotionless tone. "William made them sleep." As one, the 7 children turned toward the gate, their hands reaching for the frost-covered bars. "Stop!" Calloway commanded, positioning herself between the children and the gate. "Thomas, all of you, this isn't what you want. William isn't your friend." "But he is," Thomas insisted. "He's shown us what happens when the circle is complete. The Waiting One will remake the valley. No more pain, no more separation. Everyone together forever. That's not life, Thomas. That's something else entirely." The boy's expression remained blank. "William says you can't stop what's already begun. The circle was started by Thomas Blackwood. It will be completed by us." On the hillside, the blue light intensified, and the Sullivan figure began to change, elongating, twisting, becoming something that was neither man nor child, but a grotesque amalgamation of countless forms pressed together. The entity that had called itself William, that had worn Sullivan's body like a suit, revealed its true nature at last. The Waiting One, partially emerged from whatever dimension had held it imprisoned for centuries. "Fire!" Calloway ordered through her radio, and her team unleashed a barrage of blessed ammunition at the transforming entity. Where the special shells struck, the Waiting One's form hissed and bubbled, temporary wounds appearing in its misty substance. It howled in frustration, a sound that shattered windows throughout the valley and sent volunteers to their knees, hands pressed against bleeding ears. Taking advantage of the distraction, Calloway grabbed Thomas Jenkins, throwing him over her shoulder. "Get the others!" she shouted to Deputy Jenkins, who had rushed to her position. Together they managed to secure 5 of the 7 children, but 2 twin girls named Sarah and Sophie Miller slipped through their grasp and pressed their hands against the frozen gate. The metal shattered at their touch, opening a path to the hillside beyond. "William is waiting," they said in unison, stepping through the broken gate. "No!" Calloway lunged for them, but was thrown back by an invisible force as the twins crossed the boundary. The air around them shimmered like heat rising from summer asphalt. The Waiting One's form pulsed with renewed vigor, tendrils of mist stretching toward the approaching children. "Sarah, Sophie, come back!" Calloway screamed, struggling against the invisible barrier that had repelled her. The twins turned in unison, their faces expressionless except for their eyes, which now glowed with the same eerie blue light emanating from the ground. "5 more are needed," they intoned. "The circle must be completed tonight." Deputy Jenkins held Thomas and the other rescued children tightly. "What do we do, Sheriff?" Calloway's mind raced. The specialist from New Orleans had warned that the ritual, once begun, could only be stopped by breaking the circle completely, either by preventing the required number of sacrifices or by destroying the focal point of the entity's power. The cemetery, she realized aloud. The original Blackwood graves, there the anchors holding the Waiting One to this world. With grim determination, she retrieved a pack from her patrol car containing dynamite left over from sealing the mine entrance. "Hold the children here," she instructed Jenkins. "If I'm not back in 20 minutes, get them as far away from the valley as possible. Sheriff, you can't go in there alone." "I'm not," Calloway replied, checking her shotgun. "I've got backup from a higher authority." She touched the crucifix at her throat, a family heirloom her grandmother had brought from Ireland, blessed by generations of priests. Before Jenkins could protest further, Calloway charged the broken gate. This time the invisible barrier yielded, though she felt resistance like wading through molasses. The air grew colder with each step she took up the hillside, her breath fogging before her face despite the summer night. The twins had reached the center of the ghostly gathering. They stood hand in hand beside the transformed Sullivan thing. which now towered nearly 12 feet high, a writhing column of faces and limbs, all merging and separating in constant, nauseating motion. As Calloway approached, the misty child figures turned toward her, their noosed necks twisting unnaturally. She recognized some of them from photographs of missing children dating back decades of Williams. Friends, trapped between life and death, serving the waiting one. "You are too late, Sheriff," the entity spoke, its voice a chorus of children and adults speaking in perfect, horrifying unison. "The circle has already begun to close. When the sun rises, Redwood Valley will become my domain entirely." Calloway raised her shotgun. "Not if I have anything to say about it." The waiting one laughed, a sound like breaking glass and screaming children combined. "Your weapons cannot harm me in this sacred place. I have fed on the fear and pain of innocence for generations. I have waited in the darkness between worlds since Thomas Blackwood first opened the door." Around Calloway, the temperature continued to drop. Frost formed on her eyelashes, and her fingers grew numb around her shotgun. Still, she advanced toward the Blackwood Cemetery, where the original headstones stood in a perfect circle around a central point, the unmarked grave of Thomas Blackwood himself. "Sarah, Sophie, come to me," Calloway called to the twins, who stood motionless beside the entity. "Your parents are waiting. Their parents will join them soon enough," the waiting one hissed. "As will every soul in this valley. My patience is ended." The entity extended a limb toward Calloway, not an arm, but something longer, boneless, tipped with too many fingers. Where it touched the ground, the grass withered and died instantly. Calloway fired her shotgun, the blessed shells tearing through the appendage. So the waiting one shrieked and withdrew the limb, which dissolved into mist before reforming. "You only delay the inevitable," it snarled. "The children are mine. The valley is mine. The world will follow." Calloway used the distraction to rush forward, dropping her pack beside Thomas Blackwood's grave. Working quickly, she placed dynamite charges around the headstones, focusing on the oldest ones at the center of the circle. The ghostly children closed in around her, their cold fingers reaching for her clothes, her hair, her skin. Each touch brought numbing cold and flashes of horror, images of their final moments, their terror and pain as they were sacrificed to feed the waiting one's power. "I'm sorry," Calloway whispered to them as she worked. "I'm sorry no one saved you," the waiting one roared, realizing her intention. "Stop her. The anchors must be preserved." But something was happening to the ghost children. As they touched Calloway, felt her genuine remorse, her determination to end their suffering, they began to hesitate. Some withdrew, their expressions changing from blank hostility to confusion, then to hope. "You can be free," Calloway told them, setting the final charge. "All of you. This thing isn't William. It never was. It just used his face, his memory, to trap you here." The twins, Sarah and Sophie, looked at each other, then at Calloway. A flicker of awareness returned to their eyes. "He lied to us," Sophie whispered. "He said we'd be happy," Sarah added. The waiting one lashed out with multiple appendages, catching Calloway across the back. She fell to her knees beside Thomas Blackwood's grave, blood seeping through her uniform. 30 seconds, she gasped, pressing the detonator button. "Run!" The twins broke from their trance and fled down the hillside. The ghost children began to fade, their forms becoming transparent as their connection to the waiting one weakened. "No!" The entity roared, its form expanding, reaching for Calloway with countless grotesque limbs. "You cannot break the circle." Sullivan's face emerged briefly from the writhing mass, his eyes clear for a moment. "Do it," he urged. "End this, Sheriff. Free us all." Calloway dragged herself away from the gravesite, each movement sending waves of pain through her injured back. She had made it perhaps 20 yards when the dynamite detonated. The explosion tore through the cemetery, shattering the ancient headstones and craring the ground beneath. A column of blue fire erupted from the broken earth, and the waiting one's scream reached a pitch that shattered Calloway's consciousness. When she awoke, dawn was breaking over Redwood Valley. Deputy Jenkins knelt beside her, pressing a bandage to her wounds. "Did we win?" she asked weakly. Jenkins nodded, tears in his eyes. "It's gone, whatever it was. When the graves were destroyed, it just collapsed, folded in on itself like it was being sucked into a hole, and then nothing." He helped her sit up. "The twins are safe. All the children are accounted for." Calloway looked to where the Blackwood Cemetery had been. Nothing remained but a scorched depression in the earth. The oppressive cold had vanished, replaced by normal summer warmth. "Sullivan?" she asked. "No sign of him," Jenkins replied. "But I think he's at peace now." In the weeks that followed, Redwood Valley began to truly heal. The redwoods regained their vibrant color. Birds returned to sing in their branches. Children played without fear. The town council voted to create a memorial garden where the Blackwood estate had stood, a peaceful place to remember those who had been lost and to celebrate their final freedom from the Waiting One's grip. Sheriff Calloway continued her nightly patrols for a time, watching for any sign that the evil might return. But as months passed with no incidents, even she began to believe it was truly over. Yet sometimes on the anniversary of that midsummer night, children in Redwood Valley dream of a boy named William Knott, the twisted puppet of the Waiting One. But the real William Blackwood finally at peace with the other victims. In these dreams he warns them to stay vigilant, for while this Waiting One was destroyed, others exist in the dark spaces between worlds, always searching for a door, always hungry for innocent souls. And in an asylum in Louisville, Michael Sullivan's empty bed stands as a reminder that some sacrifices transcend death itself. His body never recovered, his spirit finally free from the influence that had tormented him for so long. The widow of Redwood Valley is gone, her malevolence ended, her victims remembered. The valley itself remains beautiful once more, but forever marked by the darkness that once dwelled there, a warning to those who might seek power through unspeakable means that some prices are too terrible to pay, and some entities too dangerous to invite across the threshold.